One it is. Chris, you're on the air.
Hey, Patty, how do I sound now?
A little bit better. Go ahead.
Okay, good. So hoping to talk a bit about nuclear power today. I know that we kind of started to get into like big sites and what they would mean last time we chatted. And so wanted to look at how AI and nuclear power are intersecting right now. So, there's a lot of very fair talk about 3 Mile Isle and how, a nuclear disaster is a good reason to not build nuclear. But what I think a lot of people don't know, and I honestly didn't know this till like a couple months ago, was that there were 2 units at 3 Mile Isle. And while one melted down, the other one stayed in operation till like 2017. And, just producing clean power that whole time. And so I think it was Microsoft that wanted to co-locate one of their data centers at the 3 Mile Isle site to reopen it and get all of that power, basically. Now, that's been put on hold for a little bit because of just grid regulatory stuff. Basically, they didn't want to pay for transmission, even though they perhaps should. But it seems like that will be worked out. We have another data center popping up at Diablo Canyon, which is in California, another large-scale reactor that had almost been closed, but has been extended and now given a much longer lifeline. And Amazon, I think, is looking at Washington. So, I don't know exactly what the value of AI is in our society overall, but there's a bunch of money behind it, and those investments are now flowing to larger scale nuclear plants.
It's a new shiny toy, and it's only going to grow. There could be lots of positive benefits from artificial intelligence, but at the exact same time, there is going to be huge consequences to pay. The story I read this morning regarding the spike in deep fake images powered by artificial intelligence, young girls having pictures that they posted online, fully clothed, doing whatever they're doing, then very easily manipulated to look like they're topless or fully nude, and then they're being extorted. So these things are happening. And so while we can get a good head start on our essay or our poem or our song or whatever the case may be, and the curiosity that goes with it, that's one thing. But the ways it can be utilized by the bad actors out there is something that I think it's kind of lost in the shuffle. In addition to that, the power drain, the energy needs from artificial intelligence and crypto is madness. At this moment in time, it's about 2.5% of global electricity demand for those 2 things alone.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess one of the strange things about that is somehow crypto and data centers are managing to pay for all that power. There's just so much cash going through those institutions or those businesses that, they literally have the ability to buy whole power plants. And so what I imagine will happen amongst the many consequences of it is we're probably likely going to have kind of an AI arms race where if you're a modern country, you will, for security reasons or for data management or to protect your stock market, you're going to need these large-scale data centers, if only for fraud prevention. And so at some point or another, I imagine, there would be utility in us having one of these. Now, that might be 20 years down the road, but I think that's a reasonable thing to discuss, especially because apparently John Risley wants to build one on the West Coast.
But we don't even know what that means. I mean, even reference to a data center, because what Microsoft is doing at 3 Mile Island is probably not what's being proposed by Mr. Risley on the Port Peninsula. So it's all about scale. And that's why I asked the question about that and water. So on the data center, what sort of power consumption are we looking at there? Because if we've already been told there will be some interaction with our public grid and the requirement possibly to sell power back and forth, then what does this mean? What will be the power implications there? So that and the amount of water used insofar as cooling goes, the water that is in play here, even though it's not potable water that people are using to drink from this reservoir, it was very firmly said it could only be used for this one specific purpose. So those 2 questions, I think, are still hanging, or I guess those 3. What kind of scale of data center, interaction with the public grid, and the water?
And in terms of interacting with the grid, I think that's probably still more or less limited by hydro. They don't want to buy that much power, and they've said more or less how much they want to buy. So I'm not sure if that will change with time.
No, but what changes though is how much they, RISD and the World Energy might want to buy. If the additional power demands of powering up a data center are significant, and we know they're already saying when required they may have to buy from us, this sounds to me like they may have to buy even more, because we have to factor this in, because Newfoundland Labrador Hydro at this very moment in time is looking at forecasted demand and how to satisfy it. So if that's going to be increased by, I don't know, because I don't know what kind of data center we're talking about, but if it's going to be increased dramatically, then that has to be part of the conversation, as opposed to coming out of nowhere and we just find out about it because Alex Bill does good work at all Newfoundland and Labrador.
He really does, though.
He does, yeah.
And you know, I don't know if having a data center would actually change how much power they need, because we really haven't seen in-depth models of their seasonal balancing models. So, you know, so we do have a bunch of wind here. That's true. Like in Nova Scotia, on and off for the last month or so, their wind has been at 70 or 80%. You know, that's a very, very high capacity factor. But then during the summer, it routinely is like at zero. So without kind of having a real clear picture of what their summertime and off-winter demand is, I don't think we really do know how much power they would need in order to run this business, whatever it ends up being, a data center or green steel or green hydrogen or what, you know,
it's not
all
going to be
those
green
things
steel.
have been discussed.
Small-sized data center, generally speaking, in around the neighborhood of 20, 25 megawatts. Somewhere in the middle of that world, maybe upwards of 70 megawatts. These large ones might be upwards of 250 megawatts. So it depends on what he's got proposed here, because there's a long way between 25 and 250.
Yep. And now World Energy did say that they were looking at green steel for their second phase of development. They've pivoted a couple times quietly while the ammonia contracts have been falling apart. And so this is just the next pivot that they have done in, you know, assuming wind can power things. And, you know, those things maybe don't matter. You know, a data center is not a green thing. You know, they might be good. It's certainly not a green project. And yeah, you know, so it all kind of feels like malarkey coming out of them, and we haven't been given a fair, honest picture. And you know, I don't want people getting arrested on Confederation Hill, but I think people are very rightly annoyed and overwhelmed, and it's incredibly technical, and it keeps changing. You know, so now does the public need to be versed on data centers? Does their government need to be? You know, they put out a green hydrogen strategy, really small and not very good, but they put it out in order to help further these plans. So are we going to be throwing more government money behind that now? It just, you know, I continue to be unimpressed by the moving targets that are going on.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assertion. It's been a long time since we had John Risley on. We did have him on in the early days of this conversation, and he was happy enough to accept our invitation. I guess it's time for another one.
And if you can ask them how much they think they can produce green hydrogen for, that's a really important question that they have not answered. They did kind of talk about it in to the Ammonia Producers Forum, so there are some Europeans that might have an idea of how much it'll actually cost to make the hydrogen, but we do not.
Well, the Germans, again, don't take it from me, take it from the Germans themselves. In this quest to phase away from natural gas, and again, that was the German envoy said that a couple of weeks ago, they've also set aside somewhere in the neighborhood of 1.2 billion euro to offset the price of green hydrogen, so they think it's going to be expensive.
They do. And Michael Liebrich is this great energy analyst who made what's called the hydrogen ladder. And it's basically an analysis of where hydrogen might make sense to work. And, you know, he's even he, who was fairly bullish on hydrogen, has stepped back basically everything that it would be practical to do with it. The environment's important. There is gas we can knock off our grid. There is good things we can do with energy. And it's cool that there are companies that are talking about spending a lot of money here. But I don't think that we're actually progressing towards that money being spent right now. And maybe John can correct me on that. And maybe, we've got the cheapest hydrogen in the world. And I would love to hear how that gets made in the middle of summer when the wind's not blowing.
I appreciate the time, Chris. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Patty. Have a good one.
You too. Bye-bye.